Hey everybody, I have been off a couple of weeks from shooting videos. I actually had a hip replacement surgery, and even though I didn't have that hip replacement surgery till this last week, the 2 weeks leading up to that I wasn't posting because I was super busy at work and with my other parts of life and in the garden, of course, all just to prepare for the fact that I was going to have to be off for this hip replacement surgery. So I had a video last year that was about kind of how I was getting worn out and kind of having some pain in my leg and lower back and dealing with that. And at the time, I didn't actually know what the issue was. And then I had gone into the doctor and had x-rays done and found out that I actually had advanced osteoarthritis in my left hip. I mean, we don't know exactly at my age why I ended up having that, but it's ridiculous because if you look at the x-rays and you've got the two hips together, you have the normal kind of pelvis and the round kind of hip bone that goes into it. And on my left side, it wasn't a round bone that was going into the pelvis. It was square with a bunch of almost looked barnacles looking all over it. And when the doctor did the surgery, he in fact confirmed that after they cut that off and then they replaced the hip bone, he confirmed that it was an enormous number of bone spurs in there and there was zero cartilage or space left between the hip bone and the pelvis, where as there should be in order for the joint to work properly. So yeah, it's a weird thing because the doctors are surprised that I wasn't in so much pain that I couldn't even walk, but I wasn't, until recently. I actually, I'd have pain if I spent too much time in the garden or did too much walking. But even maybe just last year, even just 12 months ago, I was actually doing hour-long hikes around the neighborhood and stuff. But then it just progressively got worse. And over the last month, I couldn't walk for more than 20 minutes without starting to have some pain. So it was time to have the surgery. And I'm happy to report so far the surgery seems to be working as they said it would. They said it's a very easy surgery in the sense of recovery time. And I had it 4 days ago and 5 days ago, I should say. And I got off the major pain medication, like the opioid type stuff. I got off that a couple of days ago, and I am now living on Tylenol and Advil and some aspirin. Yeah, and getting up and walking around every hour. I walk around with a walker and all that. So that's just a status update of what's going on with me and how come you're not seeing as much from me. But here's what you are going to see from me in order to kind of stay in the mix here, because of course I really enjoy gardening. Before I did this, I had on deck that I wanted to do a tomato episode where I went through the number of tomato plantings that I am doing this year, the different kinds of varieties that I'm doing. So that's all kind of the update for me, and stay tuned for kind of the different format for just a little bit while I'm recovering and unable to actually do a lot of hands-on gardening myself. All right. Thanks, everybody. Well, without further ado, I'm going to talk about the tomatoes that I am growing this season. I'm actually going to grow 12 different varieties of tomatoes this year. And that's me being conservative. I gravitate towards the saucing tomatoes, and then I also like cherry types. I don't really like eating the beefsteak tomatoes or slicing tomatoes fresh. I like having tomatoes for sauces and salsas, and then I like to eat cherry type of tomatoes fresh. So I'm going to start by outlining the different kinds of tomatoes in a list for you here, and then I'll go through my comments and thoughts on each of the varieties as we go through this. So the 5 kinds of cherry, grape, currant, I put those all together, cherry, grape, or currant tomatoes that we're growing this year. The first is the white currant tomato, which I'm getting the seeds from Territorial. The Clementine F1 hybrid from Johnny Seeds. The 5-star grape F1 hybrid from Johnny Seeds. The Tomatoberry cherry tomato, which I'm getting this year from Johnny's, but I've gotten previously from Territorial, and the Valentine organic, which I'm getting this year from Johnny Seeds. And then in terms of saucing tomatoes, I'll put saucing and plum tomatoes all in the same category here. I'm getting a Bush Sumpremo from Botanical Interests, a blush tomato from Johnny Seeds, the Granadero from Johnny's, the Japanese black trifle from Johnny's, although I've gotten in previous years from Territorial, the Plum Regal from Johnny's, the Posano from Johnny's, which I've also gotten from Territorial, and the Sunrise sauce from Johnny's Seeds. So those are the list of the tomatoes that I'm growing, and let me walk you through my thoughts on these as we talk through them a little bit more. Well, let's start with talking about the white currant tomato. This is a little candy-like tomato that I've grown for many years. It's very prolific for me, but the problem is that it can be hard to save. It's like picking blueberry-sized tomatoes, but they're so fragile that it works best for me to just eat them as a snack in the garden, or if I'm going to save them, I have to eat them pretty soon from harvest. They have a sweet and otherwise unique flavor to them, and they tend to grow in very heavy clusters. For me, they're not truly white. The color is more of a pale or light yellow. This is an indeterminate variety that'll just take over everything around it. Okay, well, moving on to a new tomato for me, the Clementine, a hybrid from Johnny's Seeds. I think you can get it from other seed catalogs as well. It's just Johnny's is where I'm getting it. Now, I typically grow a cherry tomato called the Orange Peruche from Territorial, and my goal is to see how this Clementine variety compares. I mean, from a photo, and because it's orange and small, it kind of looks similar, but I do see some immediate differences in kind of reviewing the notes from the seed catalogs. One immediate difference is maybe the size. The Orange Peruche is a true cherry-sized tomato, and while Johnny's Seed says that the Clementine is the size of a small plum, so it looks like the Clementine is probably bigger. It promises to be an early producer, which historically is a helpful feature for me in the Pacific Northwest, although with the summers that we've been having with a lot of heat, I don't know how much that is important anymore, but it's usually important. The Clementine is supposed to produce a sweet tart flavor, and that may be another difference from the Orange Peruche, because on average the Orange Peruche has been the sweetest cherry tomato that I've grown, even sweeter than Sun Gold. Finally, Johnny says that the plants can be grown in close quarters, and that's another good sign for my garden, because I like to fit as many tomatoes as I possibly can in my garden bed, so I typically do grow them close. So those are all the things that I'm thinking about with this Clementine and comparing it to the Orange Peruche. It sounds like it won't be exactly the same kind of thing, but I am hopeful that it will be a winner for me in the garden. Well, the next on my list is actually two types of red grape tomato, the 5-star hybrid and Valentine. These are both red grape tomato varieties. My favorite grape tomato to grow has been Sweethearts. I've typically gotten that from Territorial Seed. I'm getting these two newer varieties to me from Johnny Seeds. And I'll be looking to see if either of these is a good replacement for the Sweethearts. Johnny says that 5-star is their sweetest grape tomato. 5-star is supposed to be a crack-resistant indeterminate variety. Valentine, on the other hand, it was bred with tech from Penn State to have high lycopene, which is one of the nutrients and antioxidants that's supposed to be good for you from tomatoes. So looking forward to see how both of these turn out and which one is the better replacement for Sweethearts, which I really do love. Well, one tomato that I'm always really excited to grow is the Tomatoberry. It's a hybrid, and I really love this one for the look. And I have to admit that I garden not just for the utility of production, but also for the looks of things. And Tomatoberry is great for the look. It's another variety that I've grown for many years. Its name correlates with its shape and size, like a very large strawberry. The skin is bright red and glossy. It has a cordon of berries, and it looks like it's been grown for a magazine. This variety is supposed to be very early ripening, and it is indeterminate. Now, in terms of the taste and sweetness, it's good. It's not, I wouldn't say that it is my best tasting cherry tomato for sure, but it is good tasting, and otherwise, I mean, that look is just, it is picture perfect. Moving on to the saucing tomatoes, I've got several different saucing tomatoes, mini saucing tomatoes that I'm doing here. The first I'm going to talk about here is the Bush Sumpremo from Botanical Interests. Now, my plan for 2022 was to grow more determinate varieties, but when you look at my tomato list, it doesn't really bear that out. But anyway, the Sumpremo, which I'm going to get from, I mentioned earlier, Botanical Interest, is part of my plan of growing more determinants. It's supposed to be a mid-season saucing tomato. Haven't grown it before, so stay tuned. We'll see how I like it. Well, another steady producer for me in the garden over many years has been the Japanese black trifle tomato. This is a plum type tomato, and it's been a heavy producer in my garden. It's like a mid-sized slicing tomato that actually works well for saucing. It's a potato leaf variety. It's pear shape, and it's actually what you call a black variety of tomato. And apparently the origin is from Russia. So why it's got Japanese in the name, that's unknown, at least to me. I did a Google search and couldn't really find an answer to that, a definitive answer to that on my part. From the reviews on the web, it seems like it's slanted towards a below average taste. However, I'm not really big into eating mid-sized tomatoes like this anyway. It's the prolific sauce ability from this that attracts me, and I've liked the taste okay. So I think that it's a controversial tomato when it comes to taste if you're to do a web search of this one, but I like it, and I really like how prolific it is, and I like the look of it in the garden. Okay, well, moving on to the next plum / saucing tomato that I have growing this year, the Plum Regal hybrid. This I got to increase my saucing tomato varieties. It's supposed to yield heavy 4-ounce plum tomatoes. I haven't grown it before, so this is another one that you'll have to stay tuned to see how it goes in my garden. Another one that I did grow last year is called the Pisano. It's a hybrid. This is a San Marzano type tomato, and I love the look of the San Marzano type tomatoes. I told you all I like the look of things in the garden, not just the taste, and I love the look of the elongated San Marzanos in the garden. The seed catalogs will say that this Pisano tomato is good for greenhouse growing, although when I tried it for the first time last year, I did it outside in my regular garden beds. My summer's been really too hot to grow tomatoes like year-round in the greenhouse all summer long. I could potentially extend my season on the back end by continuing tomatoes in the greenhouse, but not during the main summer. I also originally got this tomato because it's purported resistance to blossom end rot, and as I said earlier, that's a key issue for me because normally my sauce tomatoes will, the first blush of them, the first round of them will have blossom end rot. So the last tomato that I have for you is called the Sunrise Sauce tomato. I also did this one last year as well. This is supposed to be a low maintenance paste type tomato, and that was my experience. I grew these last year and I didn't trellis them up very well. I didn't stake them up like I did my others. They, for whatever reason, where I planted them, I just kind of ended up letting them vine out throughout the garden in between other plants. And I ended up with these little round yellow orbs just all over the garden beds. And they grew well. They were prolific, and I had lots of kind of bumper tomatoes that I wasn't necessarily expecting showing up on those wild vines growing everywhere on what is yet another indeterminate plant. All right, well, thank you all for joining me in this discussion of tomatoes, something I can do while I'm letting my hip heal. I appreciate that you're hanging out with me while I'm letting my hip heal. And all right, thanks everybody.